Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here for another speaker series at Pelican Harbor. I'm Amy Leonard. I'm the director of I'm not a director of anything. I'm a wildlife educator. Director of research, Jason Jones. I was making sure I didn't forget the right title again.
Nice.
Yes, aspirations.
You're a director.
Of my own little.
You're running the show.
Absolutely. So welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you here in person. We're glad to have the folks we have on live stream as well. If ever you can't make it or you know folks who can't, let them know that we have a YouTube channel and we're always there. We're here tonight because usually we're Wednesday nights, but I had a conflict. I'm going to be speaking at Fairchild tomorrow night about opossums to the Rural Food Council.
Oh, wow.
So that's why we're on a Tuesday this time. We will be back to Wednesdays, not in March, but in April, because March, the normal evening that we would have speaker series, will be our Pelican Party Gala event at Rusty Pelican. So we invite you to look at our website for information on that. And I'm always happy to take suggestions for future speakers for speaker series, by all means. And without further ado, Dr. Jason Downing, Director of Research at Fairchild Botanical Garden.
I am the director, but not really the director. I'm the orchid guy. Most people know me as the orchid guy at Fairchild. I feel the director is it's a new title, but we're getting used to it. Well, thank you for having me. It was surprising to hear it. I kind of got confused. I thought you guys were the location, the Keys, the Wild Bird Refuge, but it's great to see some locals out. And we actually have a project going on just down the road at North Bay Village that we recently planted kind of off Treasure Island, some of the finger islands that are out there, and kind of leads into a little bit about the talk and how plants are responding to some of the changes we're seeing in South Florida. So for those that aren't familiar with the Million Orchid Project, you'll get a whole new understanding of what we do, but those that are will understand kind of the new directions we're taking in response to what we're seeing. We've been at this since 2012 is when we launched our first seeds in our laboratory. It takes about 2 years to get an orchid from a seed to a plant that's able to go out into the environment, more or less. And you couple that with Irma, which was devastating us, if you guys all remember, I was ever here, as well as COVID. So we've had some major obstacles, but we're still chugging away, and we're inching ever closer to that goal of 1 million. And that's just the beginning, as you'll find out. We now have satellite partners not only throughout the state, I'll be in Jacksonville next week, helping launch the program, getting seeds and germplasm ready, as well as far north as New York City, as well as other countries, as you'll see. But the idea is getting citizens and the public involved in orchid conservation, and thinking about orchids being used in landscape plants, not only to propagate large numbers, but also reduce the pressure of poaching and the black market, which drives a lot of this poaching. So as the name implies, the Million Orchid Project is unique. It's kind of 3 pillars which separate itself from what I call traditional conservation. So normally I'm deep in the woods, hidden in the jungle somewhere with a small team of scientists doing quote unquote conservation in a protected area, sometimes even buffer zones. In a silo is where a lot of this work takes place. But what we're trying to do with the Million Orchid Project is bring the conservation to everyone, to make sure everyone's involved, and also thinking about spaces to do conservation, which you traditionally don't expect. So instead of pristine habitat, we're in schoolyards, which actually are more protected than even protected areas, believe it or not. And unfortunately, through the wrong reason, but again, we make lemonade out of lemons all the time. But the idea of schoolyards being refuges for rare plants are something we need to think about, just simply because of the security level that's there in the presence. Parks, trees, street trees, everywhere where people live, work, learn, and play. So there's 3 pillars that make it a little bit different than traditional conservation. One is the sheer scale, 1 million. It sounds outrageous. That's what we wanted, because it's going to take high risk to get rewards now. Unfortunately, the rapid change that we're seeing, whether it's climate change, development, human population growth, etching away at conservation is important, but it may not be kind of the big ambitious things we need to undertake to correct or try to at least mitigate some of the rate of loss of biodiversity. So 1 million plants is the goal. Outrageous. The next is that it's solely driven by the public. So community-based. This is a citizen science program from its core. As you see, everything is done by a volunteer, student, or dedicated members of the public that help engage and actually put the plants out, all the way to tracking them. The whole 9 yards is driven by people to the lab work. And finally, the exclusive focus on public spaces. Again, we're not in protected areas. Of course, I have grants and we work in the Everglades and Fakahatchee on separate projects, but the Million Orchid Project is dedicated to bringing these rare plants back into public spaces. So very different than traditional conservation. And that's really how we've shaped this program and how it's even began to spawn new programs, as I'll introduce you to for the folks that are familiar with the program. So a little bit about Fairchild. As a result of the Million Orchid Project, the enthusiasm, a lot of people, we'd be out planting in some of these high-profile areas. Make the light. Yeah.
Several people have asked me, we can't, the
Can't dim the light.
The fluorescents are either on or we've got on.
You want me to try to hit this? Let's see what happens.
Oh.
Is that good?
You know that?
Yeah.
Oh, how's your camera?
That's fine. You
Okay.
can't really see you, but it's all right. We can hear you.
Well, it's. What do you think? Is it pretty bad? Okay. Well, they don't listen to it. But anyway, a lot of the comments we get, we'd be out planting in Coconut Grove or Lincoln Road or what have you, and they'd be like, "Oh wow, you guys have all these orchids in community spaces, but where are all the orchids at Fairchild?" Well, we never really had invested, interest in orchids historically. We're known for our palms and our fruity tree collection, as you guys probably know, the mango collection, etc. But for the last probably about 6 years, we've been dedicated to branding and establishing the National Orchid Garden at Fairchild. We're, again, highly experimental. We're trying to basically build the world's largest, or the United States' largest collection of orchids. But what's different about our program, again, than other botanic gardens, is that these are permanently attached or grown in the collection. So typically in a botanic garden, your orchids are in the greenhouse, they bloom, they appear in the collection while they're in flower, and as soon as they're done blooming, they're back into the greenhouse and they disappear. Well, because of our unique climate in South Florida and also our rainforest and all of these unique microhabitats, we're trying to permanently establish the majority of our collection. So about 90% of our orchids we're putting out to the trees, into the landscapes like this Sobralia, which no one would think you're seeing it growing in the ground here in South Florida. And really trying to think about our collections in a different way. To date, we've done, several, nearly 35,000, it's probably closer to 50 now. Some things work, some things don't. I mean, we have things like bulbophyllum growing, Paphiopedilum, lady slippers in the ground, really pushing the envelope. And the idea is that we learn from this. We know it's experimental, we know it's risky. But what we do is things that work, we can pass that on to homeowners. This is how we evolve landscapes, is by experimenting in places like botanic gardens. 400 plus species of variety at any given time, and hundreds of thousands in propagation in our greenhouse and our laboratories. So it's a lot of fun, but it was built and it's driven all by volunteers, just like our Million Orchid program. And so any given day, you can see beautiful arrays. The vandas are one thing we specialize in and trying to understand the limits of vandaceous orchids, and they're doing quite well. Really trying to learn everything about the vandas, from resistance to the lawn pests, which really go after vandas. Southern blight and thrips tend to attack vandas. Learning the thresholds of resistance they have, how to treat them, and how to incorporate them in landscapes. And also the focus on Caribbean orchids, which I'm a bit obsessed with, I have to admit. And you'll kind of see why as the talk goes on. But again, things like our ghost orchid hybrid, as well as our native ghost orchid we're growing, which should bloom this year. We have some amazing ones that are attached. And things like Raltonia lindenii from Cuba. We have the world's largest, the United States' largest collection of Cuban orchids, and probably in the world now, through our partners. And we don't go source these orchids from key people. So we're really focused on some really interesting things that other botanic gardens don't have. But the Million Orchid Projects are on the other side of the country. That's what we're here talking about. This is not Miami. This is Singapore. And Singapore, again, I was on the phone with some of the curators today, and Kiat Tan, and some of these amazing orchid people. Basically transformed this shabby little port country. It's an island nation in Southeast Asia and Malaysia. For those that don't know, it's the most densely populated country, arguably in the world. There's millions of people in a very small little island nation. And basically what Singapore did is, through an authoritarian government, more money than God, I have to say, but one of the richest countries in the world, they were able to transform this city in a relatively short period of time. We're talking about 20, 25 years. They went from being kind of this, industrial port country into the greenest country on the planet. And this really has inspired us not only with the Million Orchid Project, because they were planting orchids in their landscapes and they were living, as you'll find out, but also, you have to go to Singapore. And we're going to try to get a delegation of Miami people to go there because what we want to do is reinvent Miami as a city and a garden. And that was their model in Singapore. They expressly built in the city as being a city and a garden, complete with its own botanic garden in the airport. Yeah, the Jewel, Shanghai Jewel, it's in the airport, all curated, all helped and led by the Botanic Garden, which played a pivotal role in reimagining Singapore. To the gardens by the bay, the 2 giant greenhouses. I think the big joke is they budgeted them at like $5 million, but it ended up doubling it, but it didn't matter, it was Singapore. Inside there are cloud forests. They have an entire cloud forest mountain that's all climate controlled. They have an army of people, but it's absolutely beyond what you can ever imagine, but it just really is inspiring to see this work. Every hotel, every developer, in order to develop in Singapore, you have to implement a green or biophilic design. And they actually made a deal with all the developers that if the plants survived for 2 to 3 years after the planting, they would reimburse a certain amount of money. So these incentive-based models are something we're working with the city of Miami and with developers to try to implement Miami. And this is the City in the Garden at Miami model. Also includes our Million Balcony Project and our Million Butterfly Project. So we're actually now growing a line of balcony plants with our new greenhouse and nursery. In our tissue culture lab, we're going to be growing balcony plants. Imagine getting the barbecue grill and the bicycle off all the high rises on the beach in downtown. Imagine the impact that would take without touching infrastructure and without touching, doing permits and growing walls of green, which is a whole different ballgame with developers. But if everyone took their own personal, role in putting plants on their balcony, we could reimagine and rethink the landscapes. And this is just, again, every building in Singapore is absolutely unreal. You have to see it. And it's all designed around people's health and well-being. But again, the National Orchid Garden kind of is the beginning of the Million Orchid Project story. And yeah, it's magical. The Garden Festival, I just got the dates. They will be in, I believe, May or June of this year, June 2026 will be the Gardens Festival in Singapore. And it's the time you want to go because it'll be all things plants and they'll have an orchid festival and judging and all that stuff. But the National Orchid Garden was a place that was always near and dear to my heart. I had a chance to work here for a lot of my research. And we actually made a visit before we built the laboratories at Fairchild. And we were going to build a new orchid lab. And this is kind of the normal situation you see in an orchid lab. It's called an in vitro lab or a culture lab. These are all sterile containers with hundreds, if not thousands, of little plants growing in vitro in sterile culture. So, of course, one of the first things that we noticed was the forward face. It was open to the public. We love that, and that's how we designed our labs at Fairchild. Most of the time, when you go to a botanic garden, the research is somewhere hidden in a building you can never find. I can't tell you how many times I go and visit a colleague. I'm like, "Where's the research building?" You go in the main entrance and you can't find it. It's somewhere, even a queue. It's hidden in the back where no one is, where the public is not allowed access to. Well, Fairchild, we want to flip that on its head like everything we do and make it publicly engaging. So you'll see our labs are big windows like a fishbowl, and it's not uncommon for me to be in the DNA lab doing something and a bunch of kids or a visitor comes in and it's like, "Hey, what are you up to?" And that's what we really love about our program and how we do things at Fairchild. And even my graduate students know that's part of the deal. You work in my lab, you gotta be able to give your elevator's pitch to anyone that walks in. That's part of communicating science and bringing science to the public. Something we don't do very well. I'm first to admit that in our field. But at the end of the day, one of the first questions we had with the folks at the garden were, "What do you do with all these orchids? This is well beyond the needs of your botanic garden, or if you had a gift shop, or even doing restoration." And what they were doing is they were actually handing them off to their public works officials. Some of my friends, which were much older now, but this is probably about 15, 20 years ago when I took this photo. And they were actually handing them off to their National Park Service, which is ran by the government, which runs all the landscapes in small island nation again. Not a lot of levels to their bureaucracy. But they were putting them out in the street trees of the extra orchids in the street trees of Singapore, collecting data. And to our surprise, again, the only data I'll show you, you'll see some of the urban areas actually outperformed some of the natural areas in terms of survivorship. So it really got us thinking, there could be something to this. And then, of course, there was all types of speculation as to why, squirrely ideas from, like, again, I always talk about the CO2 from the buses, people thought, or, or the humidity off the street pavement. But it worked. So we thought, of course, here's kind of what Singapore looks like. Bulbophyllums, no big deal. Just a whole tree full of bulbophyllums. It's like magical. And again, the queen of all orchids, Grammatophyllum specios, the large orchid world. Our bloom this year. And I hand pollinated it. Rich brought it like this. I actually took pollen from Naples Botanic Garden. Theirs bloomed this year. And theirs has been kind of waning. So I rescued pollen and I set about 4 seeds. I collected them right before the cold because I'm so worried the cold was there with the boredom. But they're about the size of a banana. I mean, they're the largest capsule I've ever seen. I got photos of it. You got to check one out. And I mean, we're thinking upwards of 100 million seeds in this one capsule. Wow. It's pretty spectacular. But these get, meters in diameter. The largest orchid in the world. The stems have been known to be 25 feet in length. And there's individuals of this plant that are 300 years old in the garden. Wow. The flowers are like dinner plates, but they just grow on the side of the road. I mean, it's Singapore. It's over the top. Again, I can't express how grandiose everything is in Singapore. I mean, there's a handful of these that flower in the whole United States, and they just grow on the roads. Yeah.
Are those Cymbidiums?
No, this is Grammatophyllum. Grammatophyllum speciosa, the queen of all orchids, or the tiger orchid. And we have this at Fairchild. It's doing quite well. And we have lots in the lab. Okay? So you'll be able to get one for your house.
Why do you call it the queen of all orchids?
It's the largest orchid in the world, and that's what kind of common names. Tiger orchid is another common name. But, common names are made up by whoever thought about it. Largest plant. There are probably Cattleyas that might get as big, if not bigger, but this is the largest orchid in terms of biomass. I mean, it looks like a sugarcane field when they're full grown. It's pretty.
2,000 or 3,000 pounds.
Oh, at least, absolutely. I mean, the ones I've seen are like 3 meters in diameter and live hundreds of years.
But how old is a plant like that?
They bloomed for the first time around 20 years.
I mean, to get that big.
300 years is the one I've seen. There's 300 years, the one in Singapore, the big one they have. It's not 3 years old. But again, we thought, why not Miami? To bring orchids to the public landscape. So we have this amazing subtropical, now tropical climate since our upgrading. Despite the little cold event we had, we are now 11A, as you'll see. And we have our own host of beautiful native orchids and diversity, which is really unrivaled in the United States. There's about 200 species in North America. Of the 200 species, about half are right here in Florida, 105 or so, depending on who you ask. And about 55 to 60, depending on who you ask, are right here in our backyard within, an hour drive of where we're standing. And that's, again, due to our unique climate, right? So we are basically the northern limit of the Caribbean. So not only do we get those Caribbean tropical species, but we also get the temperate species that coalesce in our backyard. So that makes us have disproportionate diversity compared to the rest of the United States. And we've kind of dubbed this an orchid hotspot and a great place to study orchids. And these are little Buffianas we put out recently in restoration, and some of the clamshell orchids, which are iconic. Like the little hood, the black orchid, if you're from Belize. But so we thought, we have that. We have all these components built in. And again, I left this one in for the orchid folks. I think this was one thing they thought. But what's really interesting about this, if you look at the genera of all Florida I mapped out, you can see that the majority are represented by a single species of the entire genus. These are all extratropical genus genera that make it just to that northern limit of Florida. Even some of the stuff you wouldn't expect to see, like a bulbophyllum, was once. It's extirpated now. It's thought to be extinct. It's on our wish list. It still occurs in Cuba, but we have things like bulbophyllum that's grew in Florida. Pretty bizarre, right? It's hard to even imagine how that's even possible. But again, these are extratropical things that just make it up. We have our own native Oncidium, for instance. A lot of people don't know that. The dancing lady orchids that we're offering, the yellow flower. We have our own Florida native, which you'll see. So again, over these 100+ species, many of these are also epiphytes. That's also what makes our orchids unique from the rest of the United States. Epiphytes are plants that grow on plants. Epi, outside, phyte, plant. So these are orchids that grow in trees. And for those that are from the tropics, South America, they think all the orchids are epiphytes. And those that are from the north, they'll realize most of their orchids are ground orchids. So you think of the lady slippers in the temperate northeast, right? The cypripediums, the ones, if you're in the hiking in Massachusetts or Vermont, you'll stumble upon these orchids growing in the ground. But we get both here in South Florida, which is quite unique. A special place. And also we have our giant charismatic species, our queen of orchids in South Florida, the cigar orchid, one that we're still trying to figure out. We'll get more out this year, but it's been one of our toughest to grow. But when it works, it really works. But again, even with this one, I worked with it for my PhD. We did 2,000 plants in the Fakahatchee. As we'll do our new survey this year, but we're down to 30% survivorship. So this has been one that's just it's just one that's tough to grow. It likely wants to germinate with the fungus and not get transplanted. But we'll talk all about that. And of course, our butterfly orchid, Encyclia tempensis. This is probably our most common orchid historically, if I had to guess. Old timers will usually agree with that. This used to grow along fence posts, and on the side of the road. They were in every tree, but they weren't all poached. So it really gets me thinking about, how environments have changed, how maybe urbanization, they've lost their ability to kind of sustain these large numbers. But this one will actually get as far north as Gainesville, and probably with climate change, will start to creep even up into the Panhandle. I expect relatively soon, but we've collected these in as far north again as Gainesville, Ocala, in good numbers. But this is one we grow in the largest numbers, and really important. So what happened to our orchids? This was kind of the fate of all of them. Most of our orchids were subject to extreme poaching. And this happened when Flagler built that railroad connecting the Northeast to South Florida. When they got off the train, they said the trees were dripping in orchids, was the comments. And what you're seeing, to put in perspective, there's one of those big cigar orchids right there. This is all an orchid called the mule-eared orchid, Trichocentrum undulatum. I work with this one in the Everglades. There's 40 plants left in the wild. So there's more in that wagon that are left in the wild. But don't worry, we've done tens of thousands of kids. But also things like epidendrum. You don't even see orchids in these sizes anymore, to be honest. Like the fisheries, right? If you were a fisherman in the 70s, you were catching bull, mahi every time. Now we're catching kind of down the food chain. So they're really irreplaceable in terms of their genetics, and these were basically marketed as disposable houseplants. It's really my opinion that likely orchids were coming out even before the cypress timber, just because they were so accessible. They were everywhere. They made their way on that Flagler Railroad, went to a flower shop, ended up in Rhode Island and Newport at the DuPont mansion, and pitched in the garbage when it was done.
So do you know the species of the epidendrum in there?
I don't. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, I've never really figured
And it's so clustered. It doesn't look like anceps. It doesn't look like really, maybe it's a crazy stroboliferum or one of the more compact ones, but I can't tell what it is. I'm pretty sure the one I'll show you with Dave Fairchild's wife looks like anceps.
Yeah.
It looks like anceps, or whatever it used to be called. We've changed it a little bit. But again, this happened wagon load after wagon load for decades.
So they didn't know how to procreate them.
No, and we'll talk about why.
They would die, and that was it.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll talk about why. Maybe, my dream is that there was a few of these aristocrats that had glass houses back in the day, and maybe, we could, with Art Chadwick and some of these famous people from the Northeast, or the Waldorf or David Off or somebody, we could find one of these, hidden gems in some old lady's house, but yeah, we never will find it. But burlap sack after burlap sack, and again, David Fairchild's wife looks like epidendrum anceps. But again, it's rare to see them this big in those numbers. You'll find a few way up in the cypress. But this went on. Couple that with habitat loss, basically development, the orchids were relatively wiped out. To be honest, there was not a single orchid we've ever found at a site we planted. Have you found any in the urban sites? No, not a single orchid. We always look in the trees, if it's a park or, an area that has, old growth trees. We always look to see if maybe there's a tempensis.
So we have a lot of tempensis in Broward.
Yeah, and you'll find some, down in Coral Gables off Matthew, you'll find a few, but the rest of urban Miami-Dade, we've never found a random plant, which is pretty amazing considering they were everywhere. We were blanketed with these things. So Why can we grow 1 million orchids? You ask, why didn't they reproduce them? You have to learn a little bit about the biology of the plant. So now they're different. This is not an orchid seed, this is the bean seed. And we bring this up because this is a typical seed. And orchids don't have typical seeds. So in a typical seed, the bulk of that seed is what we call the endosperm. It's food for the baby embryo. So a bean, for instance, your lima bean. Probably 90% of that seed is food for the little baby embryo, which occupies about 10% of that seed space. So that's what the energy it's providing kickstarts germination. So that's why we can stick them in the wet paper towel when they're like little kids and put them in the drawer. Voila, you get little sprouts, right? Then you plant them in your milk carton. You guys all know the experiment, right? And then you dump Coca-Cola on them and call it science. But anyway, I won't digress. But we're moving away from that. But again, that's due to because these seeds have built-in food, so they can germinate with just really the addition of water. So in the case of the coconut, they even got water. The perfect seed, right? Can wash right up and germinate readily. So we tell the little ones, their mom like to pack them a lunch. They have the food built in. Well, orchids don't have that. They sacrifice that vitriol, that food reserve, to be amongst the smallest seeds in the world. And they're born in these capsules. And this is a seed capsule or fruit, if you will. This is the old flower. And then in here, in this seed capsule, could be tens of thousands, if not millions of seeds, depending on the type of orchid. And this is what they look like. Most of them are less than 1 millimeter in size. And this is the embryo, the little baby plant. And it's basically in an air balloon. So they're designed to blow and disperse in the wind. So they sacrifice that food to be able to disperse great distances. We actually share a handful of orchids with West Africa that blow all the way across the Mediterranean. That's how much they get around. So you can imagine we share a lot in common with the Caribbean, as you saw by a lot of those species. These orchids get around. The plants get around. But you might ask yourself, well, if all the orchids are microscopic, essentially, and they have no food, well, how the heck do they germinate? And this is what people didn't understand for a very long time. Even Darwin struggled with this. A lot of people don't know. There's more orchids than any other plant on the planet. They're the largest plant family. Yes, more species, 35,000 plus, probably 40, depending on who you ask and what taxonomic group you use. So about 1 in 9, every 9 plants on the earth is an orchid. Who'd have thought? And if they all produce millions of seeds, this was Darwin's conundrum. Then how come the earth, and they're found everywhere, it's the Sahara Desert, Sahara and the Antarctica, they're found everywhere. How come the earth isn't blanketed in orchids? Well, what he didn't understand and realize is something that I studied, is that every orchid on the planet requires a fungus to germinate. A fungi. And a lot of times this is actually the mushroom forming group of fungus. The mushroom form, the basidiomycetes, for those that are microbiology. But essentially, this right here are the hyphae. So these are the little hairs of the fungus that will actually penetrate the seed. The seed will actually digest the fungus. It's bizarre. They're feeding like an animal in the beginning of their life. Every single species on the planet. They swell up. You see there's no chlorophyll. This is white. The chlorophyll are the pigments which allow plants to do photosynthesis. They're feeding like an animal. It's completely bizarre, right? So we always, when we teach the little ones, because we're taught our whole life, even elementary school, that plants are what we call autotrophs. They make their own food via photosynthesis, right? But that's not always the case, teach. There's actually a group that feeds like an animal, and those are the orchids. Completely bizarre. There's no evidence that the fungus gets anything. It's completely parasitic or predatory. So you ask yourself, and after time, maybe the leaf litter or the branch, the sunlight will be able to penetrate, become in contact with this protocorm, this basically germinating seed, and it'll begin to produce the pigments, make the first roots and the first leaves, and start behaving like a typical plant. But you ask yourself, like this, germinating out of a rotten log where all the good fungus is for a lot of these orchids. But you might ask yourself, what are the chances that you're a speck of dust, you go across from Africa, that you land on just the right tree on a mushroom? Exceedingly rare, right? Maybe 1 of a million. Less than 1% is typical for most natural, most natural germination for orchids. So that's why the earth isn't that unique. And a lot of these orchids use a specific fungus. My work was finding out, so one species will use just one type maybe, or some can use 4 or 5 types of fungus. It's completely infinitely complex, just like the flowers. But this is why people would sprinkle these darn seeds at Q in pots, and nothing would ever happen. They couldn't figure out for decades and decades. But the game changed around the 1950s. In the 1950s, a gentleman by the name of Mary Sheehy and Skoog, they basically discovered that if you provide sugar, essentially, to these seeds, you could germinate nearly 100%. Now, of course, and this came in the form of what we call a nutritive agar solution. And this was the birth of the laboratory methods of growing orchids, which gave birth to the commercial industry, which is everything we know about orchids. But essentially this agar, which is like a gelatin-like substance, the black is usually from charcoal, activated carbon, which just helps take up impurities and waste products that the orchids produce. But the main constituent that these orchids were after was sugar, sucrose. So they're mainlining the sugar from the roots. They're not producing it through photosynthesis like most plants. They're actually taking it up through their vascular tissue and feeding it. And when you do this in the lab in sterile conditions, again, you can germinate nearly all of that million seeds in a single capsule. And therefore, 1 million orchids is a reality. And that basically all started with a handful of these folks who are still with us, including my dear friend and mentor, Martin Motes. If you're an orchid guy, you know this gentleman. But we started with a handful of volunteers to see if we could teach what were considered these sterile techniques. So one thing about growing in that rich sugar medium is that if one microbe or one germ gets in there, it becomes contaminated. So it's like if you leave a banana out on the counter, it turns in mold, and particularly in South Florida with the tropics, it molds within days, right? Well, the same thing with that sugar. The sugar is so rich, any microbe that gets into this process will outgrow the orchid, right? Because fungus and bacteria grows much faster than plant. So it was thought that you had to have a trained, specialist technician to do this work. We flipped it on its head and we started with a handful of all women at this time, retirees, many of which are still with us in their 90s, still chipping away at the orchids. And we found that with the help of Dr. Motes, distilling down the complex things into a DIY way, that we could grow orchids with anyone on the street in about a half hour. We can teach you how to do this work. And that was the birth of the Million Orchid Project. So a little orchid math, one fruit or capsule, again, 100,000 to maybe 1 million seeds, creates 10 mother flasks, which are all little germinates, all with tens of thousands of little plants. After a few months, they outgrow that container, it becomes 50, that becomes 250. After about a year, you're dealing with, again, a square footage issue. It's not, can you grow? It's what the hell do you do with all these orchids? And essentially, this was like the first year of our lab, just flask after flask, full of orchids. Every single office at Fairchild had a rack. We were blowing fuses all over the garden. I'll never forget these days. Everyone who had an office literally was glowing, like, because where do we do with all these orchids? We figured out how to grow them in the lab. So that's when the schools came into play. Of course, our greenhouse, this is any given day, an endless flood of orchids being managed by amazing volunteers. And this was our handful of orchids we started with, and the ones we really focus on, selected, not because of necessarily their beauty, but because we thought they would perform well in the urban landscape, which is very different than, Fakahatchee or Everglades or Corkscrew or what have you. Or, that was weird. With the exception of the ghost orchid, which still is our mascot, it's a delicate. But we do have one growing in all places, Hialeah, at Jose Martinez, Andy, of course, it's Andy. Of course, it was actually on Channel 7. We did a little expose, and I have a really strong feeling that thing's going to bloom this year. It is so big. I mean, Rich, the roots are like almost 10 inches on each side. But he had a pop ash. It's like cheating.
So these are all native?
These are all Florida native orchids, yeah. So things
So
like...
that's what your focus is?
Yeah, and we probably have another 5 or 6 players that we're slowly introducing and trying to understand better. But things like our Tempensis, by far, are our hardiest of orchids, in my opinion, and the way they perform in a variety of situations. But Epidendrum nocturnum, which is great, it's more of a shade-loving, our own native vanillas. We're growing lots of those. A lot of people know we have native vanilla.
So you think a lot of these orchids were the ones in those carts that you showed us earlier?
Oh, absolutely.
Were all-
So this is the mule ear, the one that you saw. This is the mule ears you saw. Epidendrum you saw in there. Tempensis, I'm sure, were probably in there. Cernipodium was the cigar orchid. That's the big one that I work with. But we have some ground orchids like our native oncidium I mentioned, our native dancing lady, the Florida dancing lady, and our Bleedia purpurea, our pine pink orchid. And that's another group that's super hardy. I mean, as you'll see, you grow it in your landscape bed, and that thing will just perform. So they were kind of hand selected for, we thought they would have traits that would be hardy. And we're learning, and some work better than others, but some have really performed well, as you'll see later on in the talk. But again, we had to extend our lab, and that's where the schools came into play the first year. Really, everything starts with the kids at Fairchild. As you'll see, everything is developed from our school bus all the way to our app is designed by students. So we started out with 105 schools the very first year. Back in those days, we were testing what best media or recipe in that sugar-rich solution performs best for each of the species. So when we start the program, there were no real protocols for growing these Florida species. We had to use kind of a generic recipe, maybe something for a closely related plant, or maybe something for a phalaenopsis, like what you get at Home Depot. There wasn't a refined recipe. So one of the first things we did the first few years is determine what additives. Typically, these come in the form of plant products. Plant products, things like banana powder, potato powder, coconut water, tomato juice, pineapple juice. These are all common additives in tissue culture, not just orchids. And what we're after is not necessarily the food product, but what we're after are plant hormones, which are present in those products. So for instance, banana powder is very high in a plant hormone called auxin, which stimulates root growth. So if you want roots, you have banana powder. Potato powder stimulates stem and leaf growth. So if you want stems and leaves in your orchid, you have potato powder. So the students were just determining what ratios of these made the most robust plant, which helps them survive, right, long term. And so we did a lot of this work, much of which is published, and we're really proud of it. This was the first few years. At some point in the school year, the students would deflask. These were the good old days with the Cernipodiums. And you can see here with that cowhorn orchid, we're talking 120 plants in Fakahatchee, our largest known population, which is documented. Each one of these containers has 30 or 40 cowhorns, probably double the wild population, in Fakahatchee. In one school, extrapolate that over 100 plus schools. That's conservation happening at a scale we've never really seen before with young people. And the fate of all these orchids is right out to their schoolyards and communities at the end of each year. And then they track them long term with the new groups of students, pick up where the other students left off. And it's been a lot of fun, and we have a lot of orchids out there now. Even with the losses, we just continue to flood these areas. Because Mother Nature does pick winners, unfortunately. All the seeds are a bit different. Some survive, some don't. And there's a selection, kind of a natural selection going on out in these environments. And we'll just keep on pressing and now working on the diversity. So each year, we continue to add orchids. These are ground orchids going in, and students continue to get plants in students' hands and get them involved in conservation. Even some of our schools, like Andy School, they're even pollinate there. So they're in Hialeah, that's the largest Cuban population in North America. So they were really interested in Cuban species, so we make sure they have their own representation of Cuban species. This is the Cuban chocolate orchid, Ziglia phoenicia. We make sure they got those, and they're growing those in large numbers. And so we do all types of cultural things. We did a lot of Bahamian orchids for Coconut Grove. We did Haitian orchids in Little Haiti. So in addition to our Florida orchids. So there's a lot of fun you can have with that. But it didn't stop there. We actually got our own high school in 2014, where these students are able, it's called Biotech at Richmond Heights. These students are able to take on more in-depth projects because we get them every day, even with the textbook we worked on. And at their school, they actually have a whole orchid laboratory, even bigger than ours. They generate large numbers of orchids, and they're involved in everything from seed banking, bulking at this point. It's been 10 years, and they're really advanced, doing a lot of banking, and a lot of these orchids get quantified with special research projects and sent off to NAOC, which is our partner institution with the Smithsonian, where we're banking all the orchids in North America, seed banking. So this is a long-term conservation strategy. We put in ultra low temperatures. So I can get a seed capsule from a biologist in Everglades National Park, it'll come to Fairchild. I'll hand it right off to the kiddos. They know how to dry them, weigh them, process them, accession them, and get them sent off to their respective seed banks. And this is all done with kids. And we're even quantifying the anatomy of the orchids and seeing that how it relates to their germination time as well as their banking capacity. So it's a lot of fun stuff. And these kids really are doing amazing work. And of course, that's led to lots of publications with these kids, which is pretty amazing. But didn't stop there. Unfortunately, most schools do not have a micropropagation laboratory, basically a cancer lab in their school. So we had to find a way to bring the lab to them. This time we teamed up with our older students at the University of Miami in their School of Architecture. So this was a project done by the senior students of the University of Miami in the architecture program, the building design program. And we are fortunate enough to give them, the joke is the least sterile thing on the planet, a decommissioned school bus from Miami-Dade Public Schools, and full of dust and broke down. And their job was to turn this into a mobile, fully functional replica of our sterile lab at Fairchild. And so these students over the summer, they basically gutted this thing, tore out everything. There was gross, dust, mold, spiders, you name it. It was pretty scary. I didn't think it would work, but again, these kids were amazing. And when you get the pros, you get the form and the function, I always say. They built laminar flow hoods, the sterile equipment. So these are giant HEPA filters, and these are laminar flow hoods. This is where all the magic happens. So when you're moving orchids into sterile containers, everything has to be sterile. So you're sterile, your instruments are sterile, and the workspace is sterile. So and here's a giant laminar flow hood that scrubs out all the particles, all the germs and spores that we're breathing in and out, and it blows out a sterile sheet flow. These were custom made. They don't fit on buses, obviously. These were custom made by these kids, and they work, and they really work. And you can see we have everything from an autoclave can be fit in there. We have RODI water, it's solar diesel power generator, and even has beautiful laser etchings. Again, the pros.
Is this a high school?
What's that? This was University of Miami who designed the senior
okay.
architect students.
Oh, because you kept saying kids, and I thought it was
They are
like
kids.
a group of
They're kids. They're kids. I mean, a handful can drink a beer, but yeah, there's no kind. But no, they're old, young adults. But yeah, but when you get the pros, again, you get the beauty and you get the function, right? Something, when you get architect students. And this is what it looks like now, complete with an anatomically, botanically correct wrap. And this visits 70 schools a year, middle school, and we generate about 20 to 30,000 orchids a year on the bus alone. And I have a whole team of programming that does this, and they transfer the orchids and they scrub up, and they absolutely love it. And it comes with all types of amazing educational programming. And this visits mostly K through 8s, unfortunately. Because the bus is still a product of Miami-Dade Public Schools, we can't leave the county with it. There's a lot of constraints. They select the schools in which it visits, but if you have a school in mind, let me know. We usually can get on the wish list and go up here. But either way, it's hugely fun, and the kids are actually doing something quite impactful for conservation. And it's a really charismatic thing. We're already thinking about, we've had this rolling now for almost 12 years. It's pretty amazing how time has flied. I'd say 11 years this year. And so she's got a little long in the tooth, and we're already thinking about our 2.0, which might be something a little bit more amenable to leaving. Because again, I get requests to take this to Washington, to the Smithsonian, my lab, all around the country, and people want to have this amazing piece of equipment. So we're thinking maybe an RV or something like that. We can retrofit, and you don't need a commercial license, and that we can move around the state to corporate shows. It'll be a lot of fun. But we're doing things like that already, bringing these little small hood units. I think this was up in Kanawha, up in Central Florida, and getting kids involved in the lab work. Introducing them to science early is the fun. So the Shade House was another project I just mentioned briefly. Again, one of the things we want every school to participate in every aspect of the program. All these orchids need time to harden off. So that means the time they come out, their bubble guts, and then they have to go to a greenhouse or shade house, usually for a few months to a year, depending on the species. That's where they harden or acclimate to the real world, right? They're going to college. That's how this kids. Some make it, some don't. And but this was our solution to that. It was a little our Million Orchid Project shade house. which again, we gave them this laundry list of like beyond reasonable expectations. Like, it can't fit to any existing school structure, right? Because that would take code. We can't expect grass. We can't expect concrete. If there's a hurricane, it has to come down in 2 hours. It has to fit in the teacher's car, most importantly. So you can imagine, it has to be completely automated. We can't expect a hose. We can't expect electricity. And sure enough, they did it again. They came up with this fully autonomous system. It has a rain catchment system which fills up these ballasts. It is battery operated. It all puts together like IKEA with a single Allen wrench. It can be erected in about 3 hours and taken down in about an hour and a half. And it's great. This little unit's at our Pine Jogger Elementary School in Miami, and they're growing all types of plants, just not orchids in here. And it's fully automated, battery operated sprinkler system, and it's a great little unit. We're trying to get the price point down to about $2,000 for this. It's a little expensive. This was before COVID. We were right at about $2,900 because two pieces had to be machined, and it jumped the price up like $400. Because apparently, when you machine aluminum, it's really expensive. I'm not familiar with fabrication, but just these two little pieces we needed where the poles go in at 45-degree angles bumped it up almost a third of the cost. So we're trying to work around that. But the idea, again, what a great little unit for people to have a little shade house in their backyard, fully autonomous, and you take it down in case of a big storm. So we're still working on getting funding to this is our prototype, still exists, but we have the plans and we'd love to roll this out if you know anybody that wants to fund. But again, the students do every aspect from the DNA all the way to understanding the genetics of our plants, which is published by high school students, to bioreactor technology, all the latest, greatest ways to grow orchids. And this is real. Lots of peer-reviewed journals for kids, which is a lot of fun. So most recently, we've been looking at the new project, for those that haven't heard of the program, is the heat island effect. And this is really apropos to what we're talking about today, what I've been discussing earlier on. And so the heat island is what we're trying to understand. And this is a concept that we're dealing with all around the country, of where cities tend to be hotter and drier than the adjacent green areas in the natural area. This is called urban heat islands. So essentially all the concrete traps latent heat, which basically it's stored in the concrete, and that causes the daytime temps to be higher as well as the nighttime temps. And also it actually decreases precipitation. I've actually witnessed this with my eyes of like the beautiful clouds rolling in from Kendall. They get to like Coral Gables or downtown Miami, you see the clouds just shrivel up. That is due to the heat island effect. And so we were seeing orders of magnitude difference in the rainfall from West Kendall to downtown. Some of our students that are collecting this data, as you'll see, we're collecting temperature and precipitation data and planting orchids around these schoolyards. We want to see how different is the environment in these schoolyards, and it is insanely drastic. There was a school in Kendall that had 75 centimeters of rain during the study period. That's only a short part of the rainy season. In downtown Miami, it was less than 2. I mean, that's everything from your landscape plants, your trees, everything drastically changes. That is orders of magnitude difference due to this heat island urban effect. So we're trying to understand that through orchids. This is also couple that with our new hardiness zone. We are now officially 11A in Miami. Hard to believe, I was 9A when I came here in 99.
Wow.
So we've gone up 2 entire levels. 11B in the lower Keys, we are truly tropical. No way around it. It's even represented in our new climate models. We're actually tropical rainforest, monsoon, and tropical savanna based on our precipitation. So you get up these little interesting pockets in West Palm, they get a ton more rain than us. And it's just like cheating when it comes to the orchids. And it has to do with the patterns, the circulation patterns, and also the urban heat island effect. We just got a lot more concrete and drought in 90 days, unfortunately. And days over 90, we all know about this. Last year we had 200 plus days with less than 1.5 inches of rain in urban Miami-Dade County. That's a desert. So we really had to rethink. We're seeing massive losses, particularly of our orchids that originated in 9A. They evolved in these milder, wetter climates. The afternoon rains were consistent, 50, 100 years ago. We're not seeing that. So recently, we've been thinking about, okay, we're part of the Caribbean. We need to think about, okay, maybe our landscapes, we need to start revisiting plants that originated in these 11A zones. And so we've recently introduced a host of Caribbean genus to do comparative studies. Not necessarily to introduce them, but also thinking about the landscape plants of the future. And to be honest, these cross oceans, right? What kept them at bay was these cold events, like we just had a couple of days ago, or these bizarre situations where the low mean temps were low enough to where they didn't establish. Well, we're seeing less and less of that. So it's my hypothesis that we're going to see more of these Caribbean species establishing or colonizing South Florida, because we're really going to see, a reduction in these super cold events that keep them at bay. Things like Browtonia, an amazing genus which you find in Cuba, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, salt tolerant, really important, right? Especially coastal Miami-Dade, as well as hot growers. Myrmecophila, scorched earth orchid, I call it. It's this best orchid probably for a landscape that I can name. It's set it and forget it. You put this thing on your hottest palm next to your pool, it will establish. It's just a remarkably tough plant. Yeah.
Will these ever be able to reproduce without that microbiome?
We are finding that some, I haven't seen any of these volunteer, but I wouldn't doubt it. What we're finding through a lot of the studies, I study the mycorrhizal component in our lab. We're finding that the mycorrhiza, particularly the groups of mycorrhiza, the orchid juice, are pretty much ubiquitous. They're in every palm, host tree. So we don't think that's going to be a limiting factor. We think it's other abiotic environmental things like precipitation that may be impacting their ability to germinate. But when we do bark sampling on trees, we're finding the same mycorrhiza as I find in Jamaica in the same groups. And so I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think pollinators are a big limitation. So a lot of the pollinators that pollinate these guys in the Caribbean, we don't have them here. And a lot of honeybees may do a little bit of the job. We also have a few oil bees, but that may do the job in the introduced orchid bee. But I think pollinators will be the main limitation.
What are pollinators?
So a lot of these are pollinated by specialized oil bees in the genus Centris, and also orchid bees, which also occur in Central and South America.
You have pods on all of these, though, right? I mean,
No. Oh, Browtonia, I have seen pods. Brassivola is super rare. I've seen a handful, but those are moth pollinated, like flower, and they have nectar spur. So this one moth pollinated. I wouldn't doubt if one of our moths get to it eventually when we get a high enough density.
so if I got one, I should tell you about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Laelia is another great one. Myrmecophila, again, that's the champion. This one actually associated with ants.
He has one.
But these are great. The Brassivola, Nodosa. Yeah, it's that seed. You see seeds on it.
It's got a pod.
Nice. So that's a moth for sure. Nothing else can pollinate but a moth. Yep, it has a long nectar spur, and the pollinia is way in, so the long tongue, kind of like Darwin's star orchid, goes in there.
And when can you collect a seed pod?
Usually it's a few months, but you have to wait till the ribs start to kind of yellow. If you have more than one, you wait till one opens and collect the other. It's kind of hard to gauge them without being familiar. If they get spongy, usually it's getting pretty close. If they start to split open, obviously they're done. But it's hard to tell, and they vary on the conditions of the species.
Where can we get some of these native?
These are all available online at Fairchild. We're offering all these now online, and we deliver. Or you can come to the Orchid Show and pick a lot of these Caribbean
So
stuff
go
up.
to the Orchid Show and
Yep, we're specializing in all these groups now.
and they're developed enough where I can strap them on the tree.
Yep. Absolutely. So again, our experiment, we'll get into the fun stuff to kind of wrap up. I know I'll be one a little longer than usual. Hopefully it's okay. But you'll see the Caribbean orchids are over here. They definitely outperformed in our schoolyards, the native orchids. Again, this idea that these 9A orchids are going to have to either potentially migrate northward, continue to range expand up the panhandle, or they may start to be replaced by Caribbean things that can tolerate our new urban heat and our new warming trends. So, but this is the type of stuff the students are trying to understand and give us information on, collecting on. This is the future, and we're putting it in the hands of kids. Anyway, I'll kind of skip through. I'm running a little behind. We have satellite labs all over the country in terms of education programs. Happy to say every Miami-Dade college, Broward County South Campus participates. FAU, Pine Jog has a laboratory and a facility to get orchids out. And we're now having labs everywhere where people are actually doing the lab work as well as putting orchids around the campuses. Even up as far north as Virginia. We had Grant with Smithsonian, my lab up there, and inserting their local native orchid using our classroom model. And they're doing really wonderful projects. We're in Turks and Caicos, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Cayman Islands as well as Kerala, India through Kew Gardens. So again, the idea is this model is reproducible. We can insert your local native orchid. They're everywhere on the planet, and try to get kids involved in conservation and thinking about growing rare things, right? Things that matter, not just the pea plants, the Coca-Cola. So the community partners are other big one. I'm sorry if I omitted some of you. We're up to 105 or so, I think Luna said today, 105 municipal or community partners, public and private. Happy to say nearly 90% of all cities in Miami-Dade, municipalities in Miami-Dade, have programs with this, many of which are multi-year phase plans. We're talking cities earmarking large amounts of money for orchid conservation. We're really proud of that, that they see the need in that. Every major hospital complex, we now have a contract with all of Baptist, all of Jackson, every campus. Cruise lines, retirement communities still are our best. Retirement communities have 99% survivorship. My ladies with their little squirt bottles, like it is just amazing. East Ridge, it's like every orchid is like 100% survivorship in my retirement. But again, everyone's in on the action, and it's just amazing. Broward at Fort Lauderdale will be doing the park. All of Broward isn't on here. It's just amazing, and this is kind of what we're seeing. Distributions. That's actually John Lummis. You guys know Lummis? Heard the name Lummis? Lummis Park. The guy with the gator stuff. We'll ignore the gator stuff. That's John Lummis IV. He's the great grandson of John Lummis and Fisher, who developed the island along with Fisher. And somehow he lives in Arkansas, of all places. He caught wind of the program, and they called us up one day and said they love the idea. They'd love to donate from their foundation to support the program. And they came down, him and his kids and his wife next to him. And they come every year now, and they plant orchids every summer. And they've been around now 5 years, every year coming down and planting orchids in their namesake parks. And it's a lot of fun. We do distributions, massive ones. This one had 2,000 people with Royal Caribbean. And the idea is getting orchids out as many as we can, right? In the hopes that enough survive to put those millions of seeds out to recolonize our landscapes with our lost orchids. Pop-ups, and this is what we're seeing now. Orchids well established. This is downtown Miami. Our urban-most site has some of the highest survivorship. If you're in the design district, you'll find orchids everywhere. That's a cowhorn orchid up here. The cowhorn orchids are just looking amazing. I hope one will bloom this year. I mean, they got the basket roots coming off of these things and everything.
So
It's unreal.
they're not just surviving, but they're procreating.
Good answer. Good question. Oh, finally, the trichocentrum at a school. It's a little beat up, but I was like freaking out. This was like a champion genetics. This was a 3-year-old plant. I'd never seen anything this huge. Exactly. It already flowered twice. So we're definitely gonna like clone this one. And get seeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting the seeds. This is like a champion. Again, there's 40 plants of this left in the wild. And this is one growing at a school. I believe it was one of the schools like towards the north of the county. It was on a buttonwood, but it's just a champion. This is our native Floridon city with the Biltmore. But yeah, they're flowering. That's your answer. Do they reproduce? I would say the last 3 years we've seen mass blooming events, particularly within Cichlea, but also we've been finding blooms. This is
That doesn't mean they reproduce because they flower.
You're right.
They don't have
You're right.
They don't have pollinators.
You're right.
Other stuff. Yeah.
You're getting blooms
Flower,
everywhere.
Yeah.
Bootheana's blooming. Epidendrums are blooming. Tempensis. And guess what we've been getting from the schools? Pollination. So if you build it, they will come. These are our native pollinators. The swallowtail butterfly. This on sitting actually has bumblebees or bees on it. You can't see it. And for the last 2 years, we're getting fruit set. We have lots of fruit. Look at all the capsules. This is right in the middle of US 1 in South Miami, of all places.
So have you done any study on the pollinators? Like when you're bringing some of these back, are the pollinators coming back?
Well, we're getting pictures from schools. Pollination visitations, orchids are exceedingly rare. You could sit out there for your entire life and never see a single one visit, or you could see a couple. It's completely random. We are thinking about doing Raspberry Pi cameras. We're doing that kind of in the Everglades with the natural populations. But really, it's you literally have to sit out there with a camera for hours upon hours to get the rare pollination event to happen. And that has to do a lot with orchids are cheaters. They don't really provide a reward. So they're duping other insects. and it's a whole complex. But again, we are seeing lots of fruits. That's all that matters.
But do you coordinate with whoever studies these moths or whatever they are? I mean, is that something normally done?
Yeah, it's done in the wild mostly, probably not in the urban areas, but yeah, hopefully we'll get a grad student that can take that on with some funding, but it's not a simple thing. Yeah, it's a very in-depth thing. I do a lot of pollinator watches. I've described a lot of pollination syndromes, and it takes thousands of hours of watching with nothing happening. To get one event, and hopefully your camera's ready and not dead. Absolutely. So it's literally, that's why the ghost orchid getting pollinated made, international news, because it took decades for them to capture that freaking moth finally pollinated a ghost orchid. It was a big deal. But all we know is that we see the result of the pollination, which is most important to us, and that's seed capsules. You can see here, this basically has several seed capsules, one to hist. But again, it pollinated a big check mark in the circle of life, but someone may recall the really rare factor is the fungus. Well, sure enough, the last few years, we've been finding volunteers. The circle of life is complete, at least within Cichlea tempensis, which I'll be happy and die happy if this one just comes back on its own. I'm still optimistic of the other species, but the fungus, and actually my graduate student who spent her PhD 5 years tracking the fungus, she actually again found that the fungus is everywhere. We don't think it's going to be a limiting factor of the pollinators doing their job. And all of these millions of seeds are now blowing around Miami for the first time in 80 years.
What kind of tree is this?
This is a live oak. Yep. And we're finding babies. And again, we track all this through our app, which is still in revision. Hopefully we got our new developer. This was also done by students. We got an app for that. So basically how the app works, again, once it's back uploaded, this has kind of been a struggle for us. This was originally developed by, again, students at this time at Florida International University. And we had an app. Basically how it works is the idea is that it pops up a map of all the orchids in the city of Miami or wherever you're at, maybe Lincoln Road or Doral. When you get to the orchid or you get to the site, it'll direct you in a compass to a tree or a plot. If the tree orchid is a plot, like you're at Fairchild, you get a QR code exactly with your phone, and you become a citizen scientist. So you're able to enter: is it dead? Is it alive? Has it been stolen? Does it have fruit? Does it have root attachment? All of the things, depending on your level of sophistication, can even go into the number of stems and things like that. But the idea is, again, to engage your community in these plants. Now people that didn't have an opportunity to plant one can come monitor and give us long-term demographic data on the subset of our plants. Really important part of the job. So we're hoping to have this back online by the end of the summer is our goal. It's going to be brand new and fancy. It'll have dashboards, particularly for the kids, the students, so they can compare their orchids with another schools in a different area. That's the learning tools we're trying to implement in the new version. But it's something that we're not going to give up on, but it's been down for about the last year, and some other things that we can control happen on the way with our developers. So really excited to get a new developer and get this thing up and rolling here, hopefully in mid-summer. So to finish up, we started way back in 2013 with our first plants. Today, we're nearly up to 700,000 plants, the largest of its kind in the world in terms of orchid conservation. A handful of species. We continue to grow our number of species that we understand and attempt to plant out. Our footprint increases, the number of schools and students increases, and again, through the enthusiasm, the support of folks like you guys. That's how the program generates revenue. It's how it's supported. It's how we continue our work. Folks like Rich leading the way at Broward, charging the way up in our other counties. So again, the model is reproducible. We hope to carry this on, not just in Florida with 1 million. We're not stopping here. We're going to continue to get students, young people, the community involved in restoration and plants, whether it's balconies, butterflies, or orchids. And we're not going to stop until the earth is blinking in orchids as well. Let's dream about it. So you're welcome to, if you want to get some backyard orchids, you can always shop at Fairchild. You can reach out to us if you have a school or a community, an HOA, a condo that wants to do the program. We'll come out and pitch it and write a proposal. Nothing's too little, nothing's too big for the program at this point. The idea is just keep on getting the support of everyone. Hopefully, we'll have the orchids blanketing in South Florida once again. Thank you for your time. And sorry I ran a little over. I don't know if I have time for a few questions, but I'm happy to take them.
So the orchid needs the mycorrhizome. Is the
To
mycorrhizome
germinate.
limited to the host plant?
Well, a lot of times, yep. So a lot of work I've done is that certain mycorrhizas are very restricted to host plants, but then some aren't. It's just completely complex. So what we're finding, particularly with our South Florida orchids, is that the particular group of fungus most of like Tampensis is using, the butterfly, is on every tree we sample, pretty much, from palms all the way to mahogany, black olive, most of our natives, tababuia, non-native hardwoods. It's ubiquitous. So we are really excited to find that out. I was through bark sampling. Again, my doctoral student, she sampled, all of the trees at all the sites, the orchid roots, to see what was in the roots of the orchids. And she matched it up, and there was the same fungus I had identified in the Everglades. In fact, actually, so I don't think that's going to be the issue. Now, there are always going to be oddballs, particularly with these ground orchids that specialize in very niche fungi. It gets really complex with the ground orchids, but I don't think the fungus is going to limit them. I think it's going to be weather, climate, and things like that. And pollinators.
Another question. What's your take on the monk orchid?
The Aeschyclades maculata, the little African monk orchid, it's weedy. Honestly, I worked with that one too. We have a paper on it, but I don't see it displacing any understory plants. To be honest, it gets prolific in certain areas. It does thrive in conditions a lot of other native plants don't, like under castor. It's one of the few things that'll grow under castorina and Australian pine or pine needles. You'll see that thing popping up with oyster plant. It's like they're tough as nails, but I don't think it's a problem. The Asian ground orchids, the other one, Eulophia graminea, also studied that one. We found that one as far north as Valdosta, Georgia now, and we've sampled roots. Yeah, it's up all the way to Georgia. That one I worked with in China. I only found 6 plants in China, but I can go to any Target parking lot and find a dozen here.
So let them grow.
Yeah, I think they're weedy, but weedy's not necessarily invasive, right? I don't think it's altering ecosystems or displacing understory herbaceous natives. At least that's from my take in the studies we've done.
Good question. You mentioned something about setting up a growing station at our house. How would we go about doing that?
So backyard conservation, yeah. So the best way is to get an orchid kit from us or buy some of the native orchids, and we can show you how to hand pollinate them, or hopefully pollinators are probably flying around your neighborhood and then sending us the seed and becoming one of our satellite partners, as well as growing all the other native plants that the orchid
I have a lot in
butterflies
my
need.
garden. I have about 200 orchids. They're not all native. So,
Yep. So if you're an orchid grower, we love it.
so how do you become a satellite or a partner? Or
Reach out to us. You
Who do I reach out to?
can email them, but also you can reach my manager, Luna. She's the real.
You have a card or something? Or, okay.
I have a card. I can get you a card. Yeah. Hopefully we'll see you guys at the Orchid Festival. You can come shop for a few of these orchids, all designed for your yards. Your landscapes. It will be March 10th, 11th, 12th. It's the weekend, the second week of March. But we're specializing again. We're not going to have the rare, Paphiopedilums, but we'll have orchids for your landscapes. These are all orchids designed for the backyard. What's that?
Why do I think you were talking about 6 months of age? Okay.
6 months of age.